proceedings. Let me introduce Dr. Ashish. Dr. Ashish Khanna is the staff intensivist and anesthesiologist. He is associate professor of anesthesiology and section head for research in the Wake Forest University School of Medicine, Winston-Salem, NC. So, welcome, Dr. Ashish.
Thank you, Deepak, and I apologize for little technical
Yeah.
problems I was having.
First question I would like to have opinion of all the panelists is, what are the rescue therapies once we have ventilated the patient and still the saturation is not picking up? So what are the rescue therapies? What is your take on? There are so many rescue therapies are there in the literature, but what are pertinent to COVID? What is your thought process? So I'll start with Babu Abraham. Babu.
Okay. For me, the only thing that really seemed to work is steroid and tocilizumab. Unfortunately, we don't have tocilizumab now, but steroid. So the big debate that we are having now is, should we just go with the 6 milligram Dexa or its equivalent, or should we double the dose because we don't have Tosi? So these are the two things that we use in our hospital. Rest are still, we are just debating because we don't have anything. We're debating. We haven't started using anything else.
Okay. What about Dr. Karanth? What is your take on?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Babu. I think these are the two evidence-proven sort of rescue therapies. But we have
actually, sorry to interrupt. These are not tocilizumab and steroid. I won't say they are rescue therapy. They are the mainstay. They are the mainstream. They are the standard of care. Tocilizumab, I may be plus minus. I'll say just a little pinch of salt, whether to give or not. But no doubt about the steroid. They are the mainstay. They are the standard of care. So we are not talking about the either tocilizumab or steroid. We are talking about the rescue therapy beyond the ventilation. What I intend to cover is the ECMO, the VV ECMO, the VA Novalung, the CRRT, the plasma exchange, all those stuff like adsorbent therapies, cytosorbent, those type of stuff.
Okay. So I think the bottom line of the answer for this would be that I would probably stick to what we have been doing for all the other diseases largely. And the indications for CRRT or for other modalities of support would be very much like any other ICU patient. Initially, there was a lot of hesitancy to use ECMO even when we started off in the first wave. But I think midway through the first wave, we started doing ECMOs, and about out of 10 patients, we have had 5 who have survived, 5 who have not. So I think I would still go with the fact that proning, no hypoxia, not getting better with first proning, or lung compliance being very, very bad. Sometimes you find that hypoxia improves, but the plateau pressure sits around 35, 38. Then I think there is a role, if nothing else works, probably there is a role to go on to ECMO, is how I would look at it.
Take it forward what Dr. Sunil Karanth has said about the proning and ECMO. When you feel the proning is the appropriate, and for how long?
For me, sir?
No, Dr. Pandit.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Actually, you got muted. वो मेरा नाम बोला तभी.
So I'm sorry.
No problem. Look, I completely agree with Sunil that rescue therapy, again, proning is not really a rescue therapy. It is probably become a standard of care. I don't think that it's a rescue therapy. Yes, what I would say is the best recruitment maneuver. If I may rephrase it, that what is proning? It's the best recruitment maneuver. Whatever you could recruit without actually rushing and increasing the PEEP and doing mechanical changes on the ventilator, you could just prone the patient and achieve the same thing. So we have a very standard policy, Dr. Govil, that we actually prone anybody who gets ventilated immediately as soon as we are able to do that. That means that once the lines are in, patient is stabilized a little bit after intubation, we sort of prone them up, which happens within the first 1.5 hours after intubation. And we've seen that proning has really helped us in our results, and our results are there to basically look at. We don't have any necessary upper limit of how many cycles of proning we would do, but generally what I see is between 3 to 5 cycles most patients require, at least 3 days of proning. That means 16-17 hours of one cycle, 3 days of proning. ECMO, whichever patients who have been more than 2 weeks from the onset of illness, I have put on ECMO, we've lost them, or we've had to go and do a transplant. So we've done 2 transplants. One survived. One did
I'll
not.
come back
Yeah,
to
I'll come to
transplant.
that.
I'll
Yeah,
come back
yeah.
to transplant
I
in the
won't,
later part.
I won't take the thunder out of the talk there. In terms of ECMO before 2 weeks interval, yes, the best results are if you do it within the first 5 to 7, all of them have survived. Again, if I push it between 10 and 14 days, most of them have survived. So it's not very good after 10 days is what I feel. So if you have to put somebody on ECMO, put them up early. And we have been a bit choosy about our ECMO patients. We try to take them as young as they can be. So preferably below 60 years of age. Most have been between the 30s and 50 years of age. And we've had good success with a few of them, really, really good success with a few of them. But few we've badly fallen on the face as well. So ECMO, I think, again, the success rate is best between the first week or towards the end of the first week and beginning of the second week.
Dr. Gopal sir, what is your take on these different therapies like cytosorbent, chloromixin? There are so many filters like
I know.
Yeah, 5 or 6 type of filters are available in the market.
I know.
Incidentally, I have taken only 2 names. That does not mean that I am biased or I am associated with those companies.
No. Thank you for asking. First thing is, in the second wave of COVID, we are seeing many people presenting with pulmonary edema at the time of intubation. A frothy pink sputum coming out profusely, even without any left ventricular dysfunction. For those subset of patients, in the last 1 month, we had very good results when we dehydrated the patient when they presented with pulmonary edema with furosemide and, if necessary, albumin. We had actually escaped further ventilation, further therapies like ECMO. That is one point I would like to see, and would advise that keep them neutral after 48 hours of presentation, or if they present with pulmonary edema. The second one, to be specific to the question you asked, in the last cycle of last pandemic of COVID, when we had cytokine storms, Oxaris helped us very much. We had about 40 cases attached to CRRT with Oxaris, and I have the data. I would find some time to present at a later venue, where our cytokine levels have come down and the mortality has also improved. So we learned to depend more on Oxaris rather than Cytosorb. Nothing against Cytosorb as such, but Oxaris we found to be more broad spectrum filter in this particular, of course, with CRRT. And we learned from that, and later we started doing early CRRT in the late phase of last pandemic, and we could advise even our colleagues in other centers in Hyderabad to follow suit, and they also reported good results. Probably that's a good rescue therapy I can report.
Dr. Ashish, what is your take on these rescue therapy, and what all you consider as a rescue therapy? Then we can discuss each one separately.
So first of all, let me start by saying thank you, and my heart go and my full support to all of you, what you're doing in India right now, what you're dealing with. My own parents, by the way, are victims of this disease right now, and they're doing okay. But I feel for whatever's going on. In terms of rescue therapy, I will tell you that I've listened to all of the panelists here. I think something that we employ pretty early is a little bit of right ventricular unloading using some Flolan or inhaled epoprostenol. That we feel that as soon as a patient is prone or likely to get prone, we will, if we have the ability to use Flolan, we will use that. I am also a big proponent for keeping these patients dry. So furosemide in combination with Flolan, aggressively prone. Most of the centers here don't allow proning for more than 16 hours at a stretch, because we feel that increases the risk for pressure injuries and complications from proning. So we'll prone for 16 hours, we'll unprone for 6 to 8 hours, knowing the risk of hypoxia, and then we'll prone again. And we don't have a hard limit on how much we can prone. We'll go on proning for 5, 6, 7 days if it's truly benefiting the patient. Then, if I'm beyond that stage, so if I've deeply sedated, paralyzed the patient, if I've tried Flolan and proning, some of my colleagues have used Cytosorb adsorbents. I won't take any brand names here, but there is some data that they help. but no real convincing evidence. So I am personally not using cytosorbent adsorbents. When my patient has reached 3 to 4 days of proning with Flolan and I'm not achieving optimal P2F ratios, I will definitely look at VV ECMO. Now, to Dr. Pandit's point, it has to be done, in my opinion, it has to be done early. And when I say early, I mean not only the days. So, if you look at ELSO guidelines, they'll say a week of mechanical ventilation. But I also count non-invasive ventilation as a part of that high pressure ventilation that we often forget. We're like, the patient's been on non-invasive ventilation for 7 days at 100% FiO2 and high driving pressures. I will take that as actually being on high pressure ventilation. So I try and limit myself to the first 7 to maximally 10 days for candidates for VV ECMO.
Can you just elaborate the flow line, because it is a new thing for many of us? Maybe the difference of the trade name or whatever it is.
So Flolan is basically inhaled epoprostenol. We are also using, some centers here use nitric oxide when they have that available. But the results with Flolan and nitric are both the same. In fact, nitric is way more expensive than Flolan. So we like inhaled epoprostenol. We put it in the circuit, in the ventilator circuit, and our respiratory therapists are pretty good at titrating it. And they talk to us, they do blood gases, they titrate it per protocol. And it does help with the redistribution of the VQ mismatch. But I have seen that there are some patients where it just doesn't do anything at all. Now, clearly ARDS is a heterogeneous disease, and in some patients, it's so far evolved that you're really not in a stage where it's going to help you.
May I request Dr. Jiggy Devatia sir to express his views? Dr. Devatia, are you there, sir?
Deepak.
Yes, sir.
Deepak, thank you. So we are maximum that we are doing is prone, and we keep proning for 16 to 18 to 24 hours, as often as possible, the patient remains responsive to doctor, and we had not gone beyond prone positioning in our institute because being cancer set up and also multiple problems with ECMO in our center. The maximum we've gone is in prone, if you're able to get the bladder pressures down and a little bit of recruitment and broad recruiting maneuver plus prone position seems to help in many patients, but at least in correcting the hypoxia initially.
I agree with Dr. Devatia sir, but side by side, I'll again say that proning has become a standard of care. So I won't take proning as a rescue therapy as far as the COVID or any ARDS patient is concerned. So there is one interesting question. Babu, you can take it, or Dr. Ashish can take it, or Dr. Rahul Pandit can take it. Considering the high incidence of chemothorax as compared to other ARDS, would you like to change the PaO2 FiO2 ratio for putting patients ECMO on this disease in COVID rather than a normal ARDS? So in normal ARDS, we take a cutoff of 80. Would you like to change it here or not?
I think my answer to that is it's very simple. It depends on your country or local institutions' stress, right? So when COVID hit us really badly in America last year around this time, and again in December, we changed our, every institution used its own policies for deciding what patient goes on ECMO, because then you also have to consider the number of patients coming into the ICU and what patients are truly salvageable versus what patients you are putting on ECMO only to compassionately extubate them and let them die 2 weeks later. So we wanted to, so the short answer is, yes, there is a cutoff, but I look at, like, for example, right now, things are very quiet in America, touch wood. So if someone comes in today, we are taking everyone for ECMO if they are hypoxic based on a standard PF ratio. But if I was having this discussion in December, I would have been very, very choosy in who goes on ECMO.
So again, coming back, yeah, Dr. Babu, please.
So I agree with Dr. Ashish. So when we are talking about ECMO, that's what was going through my mind. Chennai hasn't reached the peak yet. Even before reaching the peak, we are struggling. We don't have 1:1 nursing. We are having at the moment 1:4 nursing. Once it hits the peak, how the hell am I going to do ECMO? I need 2 nurses and the perfusionist to be at the bedside to do it. I have no manpower. So yes, it's wishful thinking, but I don't know how I'll do it, and I do not know how Rahul did it. We have done totally 4 ECMOs in the last 1 year. The proning works extremely well, and our criteria has been only 2. It's not PF ratio. It is when we are not able to ventilate the patient safe. That is, if the driving pressure is not below 15, for whatever do, we are not able to bring down the platelet pressure to less than 28. Just to get the just to get a saturation of 90%, we are doing harm. Then we think of the ECMO being instituted. Yeah, Dr. Ashish.
Dr. Govil, I'd like to just...
Yeah, please. This is an open discussion.
Sorry. Ashish, just give me 1 second. I'll just quickly finish my point. So, of all the 12 or 13 ECMOs that I've done in the last 5 months now, 4.5, 5 months now, only one has been from a patient who actually was admitted in my institute. Rest, all the 10 or 11 are actually ECMO retrievals, which we have done by going to other hospitals, putting them on ECMO and bringing them in. That's been the major workload. For our hospital, we actually intubate them fairly early as soon as we realize that the PF ratio is not improving despite best of the efforts on high flow nasal cannula or non-invasive ventilation, whatever it is, and we prone them. Apart from that one person, we have not had to put anybody on ECMO. Either they have just died or they have survived and they have done well. So that's been the case. But all these other patients were referrals which were given to me who had 90 or 100% FiO2, who actually, in a few of them, we had to go to small hospitals, intubate them, and then for the transfer, put them on ECMO, and then bring them across. And those who were within the first 5 or 7 days, pretty much within 6 to 7 days of ECMO, we were able to actually extubate them and then decannulate them in a few days' time. But those who were 2 weeks down the track, and those are the decisions which I now retrospectively regret, that I should not have put them on ECMO at all, because we just continued for 2 more weeks and then compassionately extubated them, or we basically just let them go, let them die with multi-organ dysfunction 2 weeks down the track. That's what I want to say, that it's not necessary to put most on ECMO. If you can give good intensive care, ECMO would probably be limited to only a very minuscule population which would actually deserve and benefit from it.
Yeah, so good point. Dr. Ashish would like to add something.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, when Babu said, the high plateau pressures, that's a tricky call, right? Because yes, you want to save, I totally understand that we don't want to do unsafe ventilation where we're fighting high plateau pressures, or patients likely going to get some a pneumothorax the next thing. But on the other hand, some of those lungs are beyond repair also. We well know, and I have had this experience in December here, every patient I would intubate, plateau pressures to start would be 40 to 45. And whatever I would do, I could not get them down. And they were otherwise young. They were only, day 1 of intubation. They had only had a 5-day course of disease. But I chose not to put them on ECMO because I knew from my experience till that time that once those lungs have reached the stage of almost a irreversible fibrotic disease, then the ECMO is not going to be a long-term answer. What do we do? Yes, some people talk about ambitious lung transplants, but lung transplant is no joke. And even in the best centers in the US or all over the world.
I'll come back to lung transplant just a minute.
But what I'm trying to say that driving the plateau pressure situation is, it has to be in conjunction with the age of your patient, other comorbidities, and in the overall, in America, we also talk about quality of life. So if someone's 80 years old, unfortunately has a poor quality of life, I would really think twice, because he's not going to have a great quality of life after being on ECMO for a month. So I just want to keep that in perspective.
So if I request Dr. Babu or Dr. Karan to summarize what we have discussed as a starting of the indication of the ECMO and how to start ECMO, can you do, Dr. Karan or Dr. Babu?
Karan, why don't you do it?
Yeah. So I think the indication for ECMO, as per all the panelists said, and I think as the experience we have had in the last 1.5 years or 2 years, is very much like how you would do for any other ARDS. PaO to FiO2 ratio less than 80, or in other words, as the also says, 80% mortality with conventional ventilation, provided all the other measures, including proning, have been tried. I think that is something we need to ensure, and definitely ensure that there is a reversible component of an illness, which is obviously what we see in severe COVID-19. I think that controversial point was whether when there is pressure-related issues, driving pressure or bladder pressure, it is compliance-related issues, do we go ahead with ECMO or not? I think there are two opinions here. One is that we would do it to protect the lung, to prevent barotrauma, versus we do it, we just sort of wait out, allow the lung to get better. I think to that I would like to say probably that it depends on what situation we are dealing with. I think today's wave, I think we do not have the luxury to do it for people who are having low compliance of the lung, because obviously even ECMO machines are not available. So I think we have to be really picky and choosy.
No, not only the problem, sorry to interrupt, there is not only the problem for ECMO machine, even circuits are in scarcity nowadays. So supply of circuit is also problematic.
Correct. Yeah. So I think all these need to be taken into perspective. But otherwise, I think the indications for ECMO still largely remain the same. And I think compared to the first few months to the second half of this pandemic, we seem to be doing better with our experience with ECMO in COVID itself. Dr. Babu, you can take
over. No, I think you have summarized everything that we discussed, and I agree with Dr. Ashish. I think we have to be really selective in choosing our ECMO patients, doing it early, and think about what is the endpoint. Okay, what does it do? If it is to just keep them alive for another 2 months and then
declaring it is a
right. No, so be very clear what the endpoint is before you put the ECMO.
So coming back to Dr. Ashish, he has raised a very valid point and very important aspect that we should consider the duration of non-invasive ventilation into the ventilation. Like classically, we feel that after 7 days of ventilation or 10 days of the ventilation, the ECMO after 7 days, the results are not so good. So Dr. Ashish has added new dimension to it to consider those time when we have put the patient on NIV as well. Dr. Rahul, what is your take on this statement?
In fact, I'm a little bit more stringent, if I may be allowed to be. I actually am saying that from the onset of symptoms, if you are about 10 days, forget about the non-invasive part or the invasive part. Outcomes are bad. That's what at least I have experienced. So forget about the first 4 days may not be even needing oxygen, but if they sort of deteriorate after that and your 10th or 11th day of symptoms, outcomes are poor on ECMO.
I totally agree with that. In fact, some of my colleagues have also started avoiding prolonged periods on non-invasive ventilation. It's very easy to put the mask on the patient, walk away, and let the mask deliver 700, 800 cc's of tidal volumes. And actually, that can be very damaging. You can walk away from there, monitor the patient every day, say, oh, the stats are looking okay, but you're doing a lot of harm. At that point, either you make the call that this patient needs to be intubated, at least you'll be able to provide some protective ventilation, or you do something else. You just cannot leave people on non-invasive and walk away for a week. That doesn't work.
Dr. Gopal wants to add something.
Yeah, I just want to add another perspective to this whole discussion. I'm not an expert on ECMO. We do a few with not very good results. But in this super pandemic situation in a country like India with current situation with an indefinite therapy like ECMO, the question of distributive justice comes in. If we are going to do ECMO on a patient, we are not clear where we are going, and there are patients out dying for simple ventilation, prone or NIV, how justified are we in doing this?
I agree. This is an ethical point. We can discuss it at the back end of the ECMO discussion. So I would request Dr. Babu to kindly enlighten us about the contraindication of ECMO.
See,
where would you not like to put any patient on ECMO? Not exactly the copybook indication.
No, I understand.
We will cover a little bit of the ethical part as Dr. Gopal has and Dr. Ashish has highlighted about the
Correct.
age, comorbidity, all those stuff.
Correct.
Because ultimately it's a wastage of resource. Not only wastage, we should judiciously use the resource.
Correct. So from my experience, as I said, we had put 4 patients on ECMO, and what we found on the 4, only 1 survived. And the patient who survived is the one who we put early. The patient was transferred from another hospital, just intubated, and they wanted ECMO. They came for ECMO, and as I think was just into the 10th day, he was, so we put him on ECMO, and he did well. So I think anyone who's coming, has been in the hospital or in the ICU for more than 2 weeks, I think it should be looked at as a possible, not a relative contraindication, especially if CT scan, things like that are showing, lungs which are completely damaged, and we are not able, maybe we should think twice before offering ECMO to them. One. Second is what we said, what is going to happen after ECMO. We put a patient on ECMO, what sort of quality of life are they going to have? Are they, if they had a very poor quality of life prior to getting COVID, such patients, I will again think twice before putting the patient on an ECMO, and having bridge to what, I do not know. But yeah.
So the next question which I was coming is to bridge to what? Whether bridge to lung transplant or just bridge to recovery of the lungs, that is another important question. So it is very easy to put on the patient on ECMO. You block one machine, one bed, everything. To what extent?
Deepak, one question which we need to answer. One question which we need to answer before we even go towards the ECMO discussion with the family is that ECMO to what? ECMO to recovery or ECMO to transplant? And if the erring is towards transplant, right now in Maharashtra there has been no donation in the last 1 month almost. So transplant is, even if you have money, pockets full of money, the outcome from lung transplants are not as encouraging as the other organ transplants. Even in the best centers, which is right now in Chennai or in Hyderabad, the results are not very, 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 very high. Yes, they are better than the rest of the country. I agree with you, but they're not very high like a heart transplant results or a liver
transplant. We'll come to the lung transplant just after this.
And if you have a ECMO to recovery, then yes, you choose the right patient. You choose a patient who is likely to have a good quality of life after that, who had a good quality of life before as well, and who could be productive to the family and to himself. That's when you probably go across and think of ECMO.
Dr. Gopal want to say, let's have Dr. Gopal, then we'll come back to you, Dr. Ashish, for your perspective, for NHS, US perspective, what is there?
Yeah, our center is not a lung transplant center, but we are referred to other lung transplant center in Hyderabad, which is a bit enthusiastic, if I may say so, in doing lung transplants. And I think in their whole season, last season, I don't know the exact number they have done, but they have done good number. 2 patients survived. One of them I know personally. Due to social reasons, the quality of life is very poor. The quality of life post lung transplant is very poor. So immunosuppression, etc. And he had vasculopathies. He had other problems. And you can imagine in this situation of difficulty to reach expert advice, how the situation will be in post lung transplant. So it doesn't look like a practicable solution right now to me.
Dr. Ashish, what is your take on?
So, the way I approach this is I like to have a very realistic conversation with the family. And I'll again say this, when we were in a surge situation here, much like India is right now, and India is a way worse surge situation than anything, but our surge situation was pretty bad in December. And we would openly tell families that even in the best ECMO candidate, we would say, we are going to do 2 weeks of ECMO. At the end of 2 weeks, we're going to sit down with you and tell you exactly what's going on. And if there is no signs of a recovery of native lung function, then we will proceed towards decannulation from ECMO. And if the patient doesn't make it, then unfortunately patient, because we were in a situation where there were other good candidates waiting outside. Even in the best institutions in this country, there are not more than 7 to 10 ECMO machines that can be run at any one given time, because like you all know, putting a patient on ECMO is one thing, and then managing the patient on ECMO is another thing. It's not okay just putting a patient on ECMO. You have to have the resources and the manpower to manage the patient. So I would say 2 weeks, and most places in this country would say 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, I would look at pulmonary mechanics. I would start doing cap trials. I would cap the circuit and see what the patient was doing. Some of those patients would start making a recovery by 10 to 15 days in terms of pulmonary mechanics. We would start pushing the 2 weeks a little bit. But in patients who at the end of 2 weeks look exactly the same as they look like when we put them on, or even worse, then there is really no point. Although I will say that 2 weeks is just something that, is not something that's proven in literature or science. It's something that, we decided.
Dr. Babu wants to say something.
So just to take up from Gopal, so in my center, the pre-COVID, the lung transplant success is about 80%.
Oh, we'll come to lung transplant in a minute.
Okay, I won't go there.
Winding up the ECMO thing.
Correct. So it is not that bad if you get an organ. But getting an organ is the biggest problem, like what Deepak said.
We'll come back to the lung transplant. Dr. Devatia is always considered as one of the pillar of ethics in not only in ISCCM but in India. So I'll request Dr. Devatia to please share his views about the ethical consideration in putting patient on ECMO. And as Dr. Ashish has rightly said, that after 2 weeks of the trial of ECMO is nothing coming out, they just decannulate patient or just stop ECMO. So what do you feel about this whole thing? Professor Devatia, sir. Dr. Devatia, sir, are you there? I think sir has busy in something else. So we'll start this discussion about the lung transplant. Dr. Rahul Pandit, Dr. Karan, Dr. Babu, Dr. Pelappu, Dr. Ashish. Ashish has already touched about. So what is your take on the lung transplant? Now in India, it is a hype. Every person who is having good resources, good money is looking for lung transplant. The day you intubate the patient attendant says, sir, transplant ho jayega. Can we do transplant? Can we go for a transplant? Is your center equipped for transplant? The day we intubate the patient. So what is your take on one by one, doctor, starting from the Dr. Ashish, because he is from the Western world, which started lung transplant way back when we started.
So I will tell you very
2-3 points. Who are the candidates, when you would like to consider, and the ethical issues in that.
Sure. I'll be very honest and blunt with you. I trained at Cleveland Clinic. I was on faculty there for a few years. Cleveland Clinic has one of the best cardiac thoracic surgery programs in the country, if not the world. And even there, the lung transplant overall prognosis was pretty poor in general, even in the non-COVID era, I will tell you this. Okay. So, and in the COVID world, not many centers in the US, even centers who are equipped to do lung transplant, have done lung transplants because these patients are so sick. You cannot even think of putting them on cardiopulmonary bypass and reversing cardiopulmonary bypass and managing all of that. Plus, we have a similar problem of organ donors, especially for getting a good heart-lung combination or just lungs. So my very straight approach is that, I do not yet think that lung transplant is an effective or realistic mechanism for us to salvage these patients. There has been a few success stories out of Chicago that you've all heard about. As a surgeon of Indian origin who did a lung transplant and the patient's doing well, but they're very few and far between. Correct. I can count them on my fingertips. So I would say really no to a lung transplant I'm a very realistic critical care provider, I will tell you that.
Dr. Gopal, would you like to add, sir?
Yeah, I completely agree with Dr. Khanna. I mean, if there are resources, the resource as in lung itself is less, as we say in this pandemic period. It was always less. Hyderabad has seen a good amount of donor organs over the last 2 decades. We are one of the highest centers in the country for various organs, but still, I wouldn't advise in acute or subacute stage of recovery or failure in a COVID transplant. If the person has fibrotic lung, let him go home, achieve some quality of life and come back. And if he's still struggling, if he's still fit for the transplant, then we'll think about it. But in acute stage, I will repurpose all my resources towards saving more lives.
Yes, sir. Very well said, sir.
Deepak,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I have to leave. I have another meeting.
No, it's
but I
okay.
wanted to once more thank you all and good luck, everyone. Please stay safe.
Thank
Take
you.
care of yourself.
Thank you.
And yeah, and best wishes.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much,
Dr. Kannan.
Thank you, Dr.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
So, Sunil, would you like to add what Dr. Gopal has said?
I think perfectly, sir. In fact, the question that you said itself had the answer, that the hype about lung transplant. It's truly, I think, at this point of time, at least in the pandemic time, I would call it a relative hype because successes have not been very much. We have had only one, we don't do transplant, but we have 10 patients for transplant. There's only one who had stuck on ECMO, went to Hyderabad. I'm sure sir was referring to one of those only. Who has still not come back home. He's still, I think, held up after about 6 months of post-transplant care. I think that's how a lung transplant can be viewed in this point of time because of the, I think the knowledge and the experience that we have in lung transplant from COVID, especially in the acute post-COVID setting, seems to be still very, very limited.
Dr. Abraham, would you like to add something?
Correct. Yeah. Okay, I agree with the panelist. I don't think that lung transplantation should be given, even offered as a option at this point of time because
the
of the
problem is
resources.
we are not offering. Patient families is
Correct.
imposing upon us, and
No,
I'm sure you all must be facing
exactly.
the same thing, same challenge.
Because it's very clear we won't get lungs, and even if we get a lung, I would personally say that we have a long waiting list for lung transplantation. ILD patients who are waiting, they have a better chance because they are stable ILD patients who might tolerate a lung transplant better than a sick COVID patients with bad lung being given a lung transplant. So unlike liver, who we can have a hyperacute failure coming in and superseding the list and going in for a live related donor, lung, you can't do that. So I don't think that should be offered. Yes, ECMO as a bridge to recovery, if you think the patient, maybe yes. But when it comes to lung transplantation, I don't even think that as doctors we should, give them an option or a suggestion that option is there. That's what I feel.
Dr. Karan, even if we have to go for lung transplant, what is the optimal time when we should offer? What is the time frame? Like people are starting on day one. I have seen not only lung transplant, I get calls from patient and doctors. Patient is not even on ventilator. That this such and such patient we are referring for ECMO.
Yeah.
Not even on ventilator. So same way.
Yeah. So I think
what is your take on?
Yeah, I think based on experience from previous viral pneumonias or ARDS, and of course looking at literature, patient has to be young, definitely. I think under 60, the outcomes seem to be good. And whatever case reports are there which have described successes have had younger patients doing better. We should give ample time for the acute pathology to resolve and ensure that the resolution of this problem is not going to happen. At least 4 to 6 weeks of waiting on ECMO, and preferably only a single organ failure. I think these are 2 or 3 important points which need to be considered before a patient can be taken up for lung transplant.
Dr. Rahul, what is your take on in which condition, like Dr. Karanth has very well said, beautifully said, what is the duration after which you will consider, what is other parameters like in the presence of isolated lung infection, some bacterial superimposed infection. Many people feel that if there is a pneumonitic patch, anyway that lung is going out, so it doesn't matter. Is it true or not? So I have seen many people saying that if it is blood stream infection, then it is contraindication. But if there is a small pneumonia in the lung or some bug is coming from the lung, it could be a colonizer. So why you are saying that it cannot be transplanted? What is your view on that?
It's wishful thinking. I think any infection is a problem. First of all, I have learned by the hard way. We also got carried away initially with the lung transplant. And as I said, now I don't offer lung transplant as an option. It is either ECMO to recovery or no ECMO at all. We did do 2 transplants. One survived and one died just immediately after transplant. The one who survived, as Sunil said, the quality of life is not very good. So I actually feel that this whole concept of giving new lungs to a acute or a subacute illness in COVID needs to be actually revisited and have more evidence for that. Now, obviously, you will not be able to do any randomized controlled trial, or that it will have to be a case mix taken up from whole world, across the world, and seen what it is. And India is a different ball game. You get all of these. I mean, what you said is these are self-invited transplant invitations. So I want to be on the transplant list.
Very nice term you have coined, the
self-invited.
Self-invited.
Self-invited. They have not even intubated the patient, but a call comes, the app transplant center, oh, and we want to come there. And I don't know where they get this information from. What is even saddening is that even our colleagues, our other doctors who are in smaller hospitals, actually call up and tell the relatives that you speak with Dr. Pandit. I'm sure you will speak with Dr. Govil, Dr. Babu, Dr. Karan. That tell them that he is an ECMO, he needs an ECMO. And when you actually go in the history, there are 30 days, 25 days on non-invasive ventilation, have not even considered putting them on a ventilator. They've already got infection in terms of their white cell count, procalcitonin, temperature, and that's the time when they refer you. It is just very difficult to help. My heart goes out for saying no to them, because they come up as if, you're going to make a miracle to them. And when you tell them this, they just keep on looking at you, staring at you for a long time, thinking that what is this? This is unbelievable. They came in with such a hope and you just basically smashed it off. It's very difficult, sir.
Yeah. So I'll just summarize later on these two aspects. Coming back to the first question, when we started discussing about these adsorbent therapies. So Dr. Gopal has shared his views in the early part of the adsorbent therapy. Dr. Babu, Dr. Karan, Dr. Pandit, what is your take on? As Ashish has now not with us right now, but he has already expressed that these are not available in the UK, so he don't have got he don't have got any option to use them. But Dr. Babu, would you like to use these therapies if you have given option?
We have not used it, and my unit, unfortunately, is a strongly evidence-based unit, and I have my colleagues who will shoot me if I say I want to use.
Just to say one line about the evidence-based. Then you are the people who will create the evidence. Why you are looking for the evidence? So we have
Babu, see, by the time of second week, majority of these patients are septic also.
Correct, they are.
And so there comes in your evidence.
No, even in sepsis, my unit is quite poor in using extracorporeal therapy. Unless it is an intra-abdominal sepsis and the source has been cleared, we go for the tobramycin filter. We debate a lot on using cytokine removal. Oxaris we don't use. The general opinion we have is Oxaris doesn't work. So we have very little experience with extracorporeal therapy, and what we have is limited with the tobramycin in intra-abdominal sepsis. That's where we are.
Dr. Karan, what is your take on?
We have not used extracorporeal therapies for, adsorptive therapies at all. I think there was one patient we used CytoSorb. That was because the patient was known to the company owner, proprietor of Biocon. That was the reason we were forced to use. But honestly, I think I don't think it works, at least from evidence, and we have not had much experience.
Dr. Pandit?
Sir, I have not even used tocilizumab or rituximab since September. Not even one patient. So I don't think I'm going to ever use these extracorporeal therapies right now. Unless Babu and Palepu Gopal gives me good evidence, then yes, we will.
So you are not believer in creating evidence. You just want to be a follower.
I want to be sitting on the fence and looking at these dead people.
I may add a caveat that we use these Oxaris, mostly Oxaris we used only in patients who are on CRRT. We didn't use it as a primary tool.
Okay, sir.
No, if any of the companies are willing to do a study, I'm sure there'll be enough and more ICUs willing to, they provide the thing. Let's do a proper study. But unfortunately, in the epidemic, all of them don't seem to be willing to take part in studies.
No, but this COVID has brought up a new era, a new dimension to these adsorbent therapy, because these all adsorbent therapy, they claim to be beneficial in the cytokine storm. And this is the perfect example of the cytokine storm. not the
Let me play
sepsis. Sepsis is not that perfect example of the cytokine storm.
Dr. Govil, let me play the moderator. You are sitting in the capital of absorption therapy. What do you feel?
No, sir, I don't want to discuss my experience. But to be honest with you, we started these therapies way back, few years back. And as Dr. Abraham has said, that they want to have, or Pandit, that they want to see the evidence. I believe other way. If you and me will not create evidence, who is going to create evidence? But to be honest with you, after using it for 10 years in sepsis and pancreatitis and mimic cytokine things, then gradually our usage has gone down, and now we are from believer we are turning towards the non-believer gradually. Maybe you can say that evidence is not there or whatever is. So coming to the Dr. Devatia, if we can take last question. I'm sorry, he is some. He's yeah.
Oh no, he has come back.
Yeah, he has come back. So, sir, the last question with you. If people look at you as a pillar of ethics, not only in ISCCM, in the whole country. So, what is your take on the ECMO and the lung transplant as an ethical point of view, not as a capitalistic point of view where a person wants to be alive at any damn cost? Sir.
Thanks for paying me what I think you meant to be a compliment, but actually it's a loaded question. So, so you have to consider the situation. This is a pandemic, and where you've got people who are struggling for oxygen, we are also talking about ECMO. So I think that's a small sort of paradox. Now, having said that, in our country, those who can afford and those who have the power will demand, and maybe at some stage you have to comply. But I think you still have to lay down the ground rules. That someone is coming like after 25 days of mechanical ventilation, I don't think they should be convicted for it. I don't think we should allow money power and some other power to dictate whether some completely unindicated person gets unindicated ECMO. I think that is something we should be very, very clear about. Whether you want to give ECMO to someone with COVID who's 65 years old and who's had 5 days of ventilation, who's still got reasonable lungs but is very hypoxic, I mean, that's an open question. So I don't know what to say about that. Lung transplant, I think, is very, 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 very wavered. I think, like Rahul said, there are no lungs. So where's the question of lung transplant? And the next time your patient comes and demands a lung transplant, you say, donor bhi saath leke aao, something like that. I don't know what.
Sir, they may actually talk to you about that. I had a patient. It's a tragedy, just an experience. Ventilated bed नहीं है करके बोला. So the family actually said, sir, ventilator है तो दे दो, मैं लेके जाता हूँ जिस hospital में है patient. That's the problem right now. They are really struggling. We have to really think about offering ECMO or not offering ECMO. This is a big problem.
It's a very unfortunate situation, a mixture of desperation and WhatsApp PhD, So, and there's all sorts of information floating around, and somewhere I think we have to be the sort of arbitrators of what is correct and what is not correct, or at least the indications for treatment are concerned. As far as your point about the extracorporeal therapies like cytosolve and the polymyx engine interruption, I think Deepak, you should have told us the evidence by now. So, because it would not be experience; it would be your evidence as well. Now, again, the other unfortunate thing that's happening in this pandemic is people are clutching at straws. At least cytosolve has been around. Whether there's been evidence or not. Ulinastatin has been around in some sort of form. But people now want to try bevacizumab, and all those sorts of things. So people are just desperate, and they're clutching at straws, and anything someone claims works, whether it's a small study or just on WhatsApp, they want to try and use. And again, I really don't know what to say, except that, if I refused to treat one of our staff members' patient with Sepsivac, because he insisted on giving her Sepsivac, and I discussed that case with Rahul also, I think, that some time back, because I needed some backup to, when you say no to a 90-year-old mother, a staff member who is also head of a department, and people want to try anything. And again, we have to sort of arbitrate somehow. It's difficult. it's easy to get evidence if we go for it because there are lots of cases. It's difficult to get evidence because everyone just up to their neck in work. So I don't know how we are going to do it, but I guess something ICCM or anyone, someone has to do something other than just go about shooting bullets here and there and hoping one hits the target somewhere. You probably kill a few in the random firing rather than save all those lives.
Thank you very much, sir, for clearing the doubts. So we have got only 6 minutes left. I want to complete in time. So can I request Dr. Babu Abraham to summarize the first part about the ECMO? What are the indications, when to start, what are the limitations, when to say no? And then Dr. Rahul can summarize about little bit about the lung transplant.
Okay, so ECMO therapy, definitely if you are going to offer to any patient, it should be done after a lot of consideration about what was the patient's pre-morbid condition and what would be his chances for recovery. And if you think that he has a good chance of a good post-recovery lifestyle, then we are going to offer it to people who are early in the disease. That means roughly around about 10 days, whose PF ratio is less than 80, who in which we have tried proning and still we have not been able to improve his oxygenation. And we think there is a strong reversible component in the lung from radiological X-rays and all that. And when we are putting them on the ECMO, we should have a very clear understanding what the endpoint is going to be. So we are going to do ECMO for a certain number of weeks, hoping that he'll recover and have an endpoint, because it's a bridge to recovery is what we are looking at this point of time. And the other thing that brought up is when we are looking at the duration before which we put in the ECMO, we should consider even the time on for which the patient was even on the NIV. So the mechanical ventilation is not only invasive mechanical but also the NIV. These are the points that we thought to start the ECMO.
Dr. Rahul?
Yes. So the discussion about lung transplant, basically to summarize it, is that in this pandemic, the results from lung transplant, whatever experience we've had across the country, are not very encouraging. And we need to think long and hard in terms of resources and what we are actually offering. And the reality that there are no organs which are actually coming because there are hardly few organ donors. However, for the understanding of the people, you need to have a person who is young, preferably below 60 years of age, where you've tried all the salvage therapies and you don't have any co-infection or any other infective or any other organ failure for that matter before you actually start thinking about a lung transplant for this patient.
Dr. Gopal sir, can you summarize the extracorporeal part?
I do agree that there is no hard evidence for extracorporeal part both in COVID and non-COVID area. And for COVID, it's too early to say that an evidence is required. So lot of offbeat or ad hoc therapies are being done. There are personal experiences, including mine, where some extracorporeal therapies like Oxaris seems to have helped the patient, but I cannot say that is to COVID alone, because most of these patients had secondary infection also. So I leave the judgment to the individual practitioners or teams of practitioners, and the jury will be out, probably will get evidence later. The other extracorporeal therapies like Cytosorb have not been used in much. And of course, we didn't discuss things like Novalung or carbon dioxide removal as yet, but they may play a role because they're purely physical filters, unlike the selective filters of cytokine. But here I want to put a word of caution. If you want to plasmapheresis is also another thing that we didn't discuss. If you want to employ these things, there are going to filter off both good and bad things. So you should be very careful about that.
So you have raised a point which I forgot to discuss in between about the Novalung. I have heard that Novalung is coming back to Indian market, and the beauty of Novalung is it doesn't require pump. It works on the arteriovenous pressure difference. So what is your take on Novalung, Dr. Pandit, Dr. Babu? If Sunil is there, Sunil can highlight. Dr. Gopal.
No, sir, I don't have experience with Novalung.
No, even I don't have got experience. I have just gone through its theory. I don't know Dr. Rahul has used it or Dr. Babu has used it.
No, we haven't used it.
Oh, but since it is working on the arteriovenous pressure gap, so it could be a good thing to utilize because there is a scarcity of the machines. So it can be utilized. I don't know whether for transport or how we can use it. I don't know.
Theoretically, there are 3 types of extracorporeal carbon dioxide removal systems. One is just based on the arteriovenous pressure. The second one is using a CRRT like roller pump, and the third one is using a centrifuge pump like the ECMO. So I do not know how effective the system that uses the arteriovenous pressure would be, because it depends on the patient's overall condition. Whereas the one that uses the CRRT like roller pumps have been tried, and they are good at removing CO2 theoretically. I haven't used it used quite well in type 2 respiratory failure patients whom oxygenation is not an issue. So I have no personal experience with it.
Hello. Yeah. So with this, Dr. Mishra, would you like to say something, or shall I summarize and close the seminar?
I think everything has been covered very well, what we wanted, summarize and close. And looking to the current situation, shall we go twice in a weekly or once in a weekly webinar? Because I think it's becoming taxing for everyone to, like, initial 4 points were important. Now we can go for every Sunday if you want, or is it okay to go on twice? Hello. Hello, Deepak?
I think you and Deepak will have to discuss that.
I'm extremely sorry. Somehow I lost my voice, so I'm not able to hear what is going on.
But we can hear you.
We can hear.
I'm extremely sorry. So, Dr. Mishra, if everything is over, can you?
Everything perfect.
Shall I conclude? So I would like to thank all the. I don't know. There was a call in between, WhatsApp call, and then I lost. No voice is coming to me.
Sir,
so my
microphone
is not. This speaker is not working right now.
Yeah, Sunil, you want to say
with
something?
this, I would like.
I
would like to thank all the panelists for sparing their time, and I would like to thank to all the participants for sparing their time and joining this. Thank you very much, and see you on the next webinar.